That's okay.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Extremely sorry for this confusion of time. Okay.
That's okay.
Got it.
That's okay.
Shall we start? I think we are, okay, 1 minute.
I had time to make some tea.
Lisa, and good afternoon, all delegates. Welcome to our inaugural edition of She Leads. At the outset, let me thank Lisa for accepting our invite. Welcome, Lisa, once again. I'll give you a small intro about our section because I'm not very sure whether you have addressed before. I don't think so. So we are 37 years old, the section as it is. A little more than 1,000 professional members and around 8,000 student members. And I'm really proud to say that our leaders have been always following an inclusive policy. I know at least for the last 10, 15 years, and that is how you can see that a past VAG, past chair is here as a section chair today, and our immediate past chair VAG is a section treasurer today. About the VAG, it's a bunch of lean, strong volunteers, an army of power girls with the full support of section Exicom and leadership. And Kerala state, as it is having the highest literacy rate, more than 90% female literacy. And in the technical education, the ratio is more than 50% or more in some courses. So that's about a small state of Kerala. Before I hand over the mic, I'll introduce our chair also, Sharda Jayakrishnan. She's a DGM of operations of Thermo Panpal, largest producer of blood bags in Asia. She's a qualified electrical engineer with a post-graduation in management. And that's what we are. And over to you, Sharda.
Yeah. Thank you, Minnie. I'm really glad to be part of this because it's a we initiative. There is a small, affinity towards that too. So welcome, Lisa. So happy that you're being part of the program launched by Section, a special program initiated by Minnie as she leads, where I understand she is going to have leaders coming in for every 2 weeks. I guess that's a kind of frequency she's planning. So Lisa, I thought I will start off with, I will go through your about yourself through various questions. I thought that would be a good thing rather than just reading through an intro. But for everyone who wants to know Lisa, she's an IEEE senior member with a master's in electrical engineering from the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg and a PhD again in electrical engineering science at Oxford. So she has been involved with IEEE as a student member and then through Engineering in Medicine and Biology Society, and now to be the chair of the Women in Engineering Committee of IEEE. So welcome once again, Lisa.
Thank you.
Lisa, how do you pronounce your name? I'm sorry to ask that.
No, it's a very fair question. So my maiden name is Lazarick,
okay,
and the married name is Lazarick Asunta, which is a Canadian-Finnish hybrid name.
Okay, oh great. That's so okay, so we'll put it as Lisa. That's much better.
Lisa is fine.
Yeah, yeah. So Lisa, I think Minnie already touched upon what is the kind of scenario that we have in our state in Kerala with respect to the women education. We are one of the most literate in the whole of India. And if you look at young girls, there are many who chose STEM and then come over to engineering as such. Okay, so I would like you to take you through what made you come to engineering, and what about your childhood? What is it that inspired you to become an engineer as such?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be the inaugural speaker, and I had the pleasure of meeting Minnie in person just before the lockdown really transpired in New Orleans, and she's a wonderful leader, and I think a very nice person.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
you're welcome. And it's a pleasure to speak, and I think the context that you provided me about Kerala is really important to think about, you know, who's on the call today and where you're at in your section. I came to engineering quite late. I think I had my first computer at the age of 20. Nobody in my family is an engineer. Um, I think I went through various stages when I was young. Like I had braces for my teeth, so I thought I'd be an orthodontist, and I thought law was interesting, and I actually excelled at English, so I didn't know really what I wanted to do, but I was sort of this general all-round kind of student. I loved science, I loved English and art and history. I did a mentorship project when I was 18, and I think at my school it tended to be that if you were a good student, you got picked for lots of extracurricular activities. And I was generally a very good student and didn't have to study very much, one of those kinds of students, and always wanted to put my hand up and join things. So I started with this mentorship program, and they teamed you up with uh, any profession you liked. And when they were talking to me, I said, well, I'm really interested in helping people. I was interested in like the medical aspect of things. I'm a bit squeamish, so I think when I was young, I wasn't sure if I wanted to become a medical doctor. But if you were really good in school where I lived, that was like the mecca, becoming a medical doctor. If you were the smartest in your class, you'd become a doctor. So I said to this teacher who was sort of interviewing me and chatting about it, I said, I'm also quite interested in technology. And which is interesting since I never had a computer or anything like that, but I was quite mechanical, and I liked things that were electrical in those days, and I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. Um, and they teamed me up with two people, actually. So it was a very unique mentorship program. I was teamed up with an orthopedic surgeon who let me come into a surgery, an operating theater, to see hip and knee replacements. But I was also teamed up with a prosthetist. So the person who actually would be fitting the arms and legs and using the myoelectric signals from the muscles to do sort of really fundamental rudimentary movement in the hands. And that teaming up where this orthopedic surgeon worked with this prosthetist and seeing that was the bug for me. That's where engineering really came into play. And at the time when I came into engineering, it was easier to get out of engineering than to go into engineering. So there was a lot of overlap in the coursework, and I ended up staying in engineering for years. That was it.
Yes. And so I understand you had a passion towards, based on your mentoring, you had a passion towards going into a technical field. So what do you think that students in the engineering field should look for when they are during their course, or how would you put that?
I think when you come to these talks about leadership and empowerment, a lot of people throw the word mentor around. And it's a little bit daunting because I've been involved with some mentoring programs really early on before this kind of video technology existed, where you would email someone and they'd email you back, or you'd have you write a letter to somebody. But the more I think back about my journey, and the more I think back about what inspired me and how I ended up where I am, it was always because there was a professor or a teacher that I had an affinity with, or a course that I really liked, or someone who suggested something to me. And that's what they call mentoring. So one of the things that I suggest to people is that it's a good idea to seek out things that you're interested in and people who you respect and trust. And you can always just ask for some help or their opinion about something. That's a more informal way of mentoring. But you should also mentor yourself. So it's actually very gratifying to teach students or work as a lab demonstrator and see what that feels like, the giving back process. And if you want more formal mentoring, nowadays there are so many programs within IEEE and all around the world, which is about formalizing a relationship where you're actually looking at particular stages of your career. How do you get from A to B? How do you decide what topic to choose? And it's mostly about finding passions and actually saying to people who you respect and admire and you think their work is just really cool, saying, could we have a chat? Because more often than not, people will have 15 minutes for a chat.
Yeah, you touched upon mentoring, and that's a very recognizable aspect even in the student career.
Yeah.
So moving on, what I mean, you have come out to a stage where you have reached certain levels in your career. So one thing that we generally feel, I had actually mailed to you, we generally feel in our society is there are some societal norms where there are engineering students who come out, they have their early career, and then halfway through or sometime through they then come out of it
Yeah.
due to many consequences. Some may be because of their family matters, or some may be that they're not tough enough to battle around through to come up in the career. So what do you think about it, and what would be your message, kind of thing?
It hasn't been an easy road. I don't think anyone's road is particularly easy. I finished a PhD during the 2008 crash and couldn't get a job for a year. And this is for someone who's, never really got less than an A grade, or, didn't apply for something and get it. Like, those kinds of setbacks are quite enormous. And I worked at a fabulous charitable organization, but we had four restructures in 5 years. So constant change. And I think what some of the time off and what all of this has taught me is that you really need to think about what is it that you enjoy, because the worst thing is to do a job that you don't like or to study something that you don't like. And I find that talking to people about their careers and looking at engineering in particular and staying in engineering, well, I left the field, but I still identify with engineers. I find that the training that I've got, the way that I think, the pragmatic approach to things, the logical approach to things is a very unique experience that engineers get more so than other people in different disciplines. And when, thinking about jobs and moving forward, and also having kids. So I have a young daughter. That changes a lot of things. If I'm going to spend my time volunteering or working away from her, it has to be for something that I think is worthwhile. And finding that is difficult. So a quick example I'll give you for everybody on this call is that my current job was not what I set out to get. So I've been looking at the University of Reading for several years. I didn't want to commute anymore. We had the young daughter, and I actually took a big pay cut and took a sort of a lower job than I was used to, because I thought that my skills would transfer well and I thought it was interesting. And 6 months into that job, my manager quit. She resigned because she found a job closer to where she lived, and then I got her job. So this is back to sort of a level where I was before, but I had to go through that sort of journey, as it were, because it fit better for my life. And also it was something that I was really interested in, and that paid off.
Yeah, so you touched upon what how do you come out of a setback, and I really like the way you put it. So you were also mentioning about volunteering.
Yeah.
So what conviction has made you see that volunteering is an integral part of a person's professional and also personal growth? How would you put that across?
Well, before I will answer that for sure. The one thing I did learn from all these restructures and big setbacks that were really bad for the confidence. Someone said to me once that you're in a situation and it's not good and you don't have control over it, but what you can control is how you react to it. And it was only for a number of years later that I realized that the advice that I was given was, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. I did, it took me years to realize that that was the wise words of wisdom from this chap. But the volunteering aspect of my life has been profound in some ways, because I started in 2001 with making a student chapter at the University of Manitoba. And then, I was always like, I want to do things. I don't need to get paid. It's fun. I like it. I'm a joiner. I put my hand up all the time. I don't know why. I think that's just how I'm built. But throughout these years being a student rep for a huge society, and then doing a good job and being asked to do another job, and then going from that next job, which I did a student rep position for my society, and then the young professional, and then women in engineering, and then sort of leading up to becoming chair. There are so many opportunities with volunteerism that you will not get in your career. I worked in an organization, and I still work at the university, where I think if I was at the University of Reading for 30 years, I still probably wouldn't be invited to a board of directors meeting. And yet, after a 20-year career of volunteering, I went to a board of directors meeting for IEEE in Japan. And thinking about the skills that I've gained from IEEE, it's been enormous in terms of getting a job and having an edge over everybody else. So my first job, my first dream job after university, there were 400 people who applied for this role. And this wasn't even a permanent job. It was a role covering for someone who went on maternity leave. So it was a one-year position, and 400 people applied, and they all had a PhD. And what did I talk about for my interview? IEEE. I talked about what I had done for IEEE and project management and all these skills. And so now in my current role, having a committee of 60 people internationally is still something I would never be able to do in my current position. So it's finding these outlets and avenues for exploring who you are and giving a chance, because the reality is you don't always get those chances where you work. The structures don't always work in your favor. You can have really bad bosses, male or female, and they're not interested in enthusiastic people who have a positive outlook on life. I actually was told that I was too happy at the office once. And I went to a seminar by a psychologist and sort of career coacher, and she said, that's great, because science has shown that that makes you more productive, that makes you blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, I should have said that to this person, but I didn't, because I didn't know.
Right. So you did mention about leadership. So Lisa, what is leadership for you? How do you term leadership?
Well, I like to think that I'm still learning quite a bit. I have a very big champion in IEEE who I'm learning from all the time. But leadership more and more for me is about understanding the strengths of your team. And as an example, I was asked just this week that I should be the one to make a video for International Women in Engineering Day. And one of our members submitted the most beautiful video that she had created at home. And I said, let's go for it. You know, like, why do I have to be this champion? I have a committee of wonderful, extraordinary people. And then I got pinged back to say, but don't you want to make the message alongside the video? No, I don't. And actually being a leader is putting your trust into people and to develop team. You know, there are complications with WIE that we have a committee of 60, which is enormous. But I think in terms of leadership, it's trying to think about what's good for the organization rather than yourself. What are your priorities? How do you pick your battles? I once asked an old manager who used to draw a diagram of all the opportunities she had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like 20. And I said, well, how do you choose? And she said, well, you just continuously look at what you've got going on, and then you pick your strengths, where your relationship's the best, what opportunities come to you. And I think that kind of leadership, where you're constantly thinking about a long game and short gains, but the long-term story, is what I'm trying to aim for. And also doing things that empower your team much more so than we have in the past, and that's tricky.
So Lisa, you have also worked in university, or you have had a career, and now you have a growth in IEEE. So how do you draw the parallels on terms of leadership for the young people who are in this call?
I think that there are ways of putting yourself forward and sticking your neck out and trying new things and challenging yourself. I was on a call yesterday and I heard a 17-year-old woman say that she gave up music, which was a shame because it was her outlet for creative expression. I never spoke like that at 17. Everybody is their own individual person, and you need to figure out what is A to B for you. Where do you want to end up? And actually thinking about along the way, you're not going to get there quickly. And leadership is about maintaining a path and also doing things that you feel is important. So my work with women in engineering, I sort of I applied for the chair position under duress. I wasn't sure if I actually wanted it, but I wanted to make a change, but I wasn't sure if the responsibility was something that I could handle. And there's a lot of conflating issues whenever you talk about gender, especially with a big corporation like IEEE. And for me, it was about leadership in terms of leading everybody forward. It's about making a change and making a difference. And what is that change that you want to make, and maintaining the path.
Great. So you brought about a point related to gender, which is, you can say there are two different scenarios for it. One is we say, yes, we need to talk about gender because we need to differentiate between the skills for a man and a woman and how people are and things like that. The other side, we say, do we really need to go for a gender disparity when we have grown so much in the world and all the opportunities are provided equally? So,
Yeah.
in the world. So what is your take on gender as such? Gender
Well,
equality?
it's I did read your questions ahead of time, so I'm following you quite well. With gender, women in engineering it has that exact problem. There are so many women who do not want to be even affiliated with women in engineering. And part of the reason why we even have a fee is because so many men and even non-women, non-females, wanted to support this cause of there are issues in a lot of countries and in different levels of inequality. So if you look at predominantly Canada, the US, Australia, and England, we're having a terrible time getting girls into STEM. Whereas, in Kerala, that's not an issue. And then there's different cultures. I said to a woman in Italy, how wonderful that you've got 50% women in your biomedical institute. And she said, yes, but the problem is when you get married, they're gone. So this disparity, I think, is going to be around for still a little bit longer, that you can identify as being a woman and want to just be known for your technical prowess and be an engineer. And IEEE is actually a very good leveler for that in times, because you can be an editor. There's a lot of opportunities that you can grab in IEEE to stick your neck out, to make a difference and be technical. So there are routes that you can do to start being more technical. My take about all of this, like, when do we stop talking about it? Well, I don't think we're there yet. COVID has been very interesting in that respect because we're all home. And
Yes.
then what happened? So you're smiling. So and someone said to me they wished that even though, they're a prominent professor in engineering, they're doing a lot of the housework because it fell to them. Now, I have married a Finnish man whose mother had 2 PhDs and a very different education system, a very different take on equality. And I don't think I would have been able to do any of my volunteer work without his support, because, they mention a lot of times for women, like, what's your work-life balance? Well, he has to do a work-life balance as much as I do. So there are times where I think we really, really need to stop talking about these sorts of things with women, like work-life balance. And I had an article written about me and a huge complaint in a comment to say, why does she have to say she's a mother? Well, why don't you ask the men in these interviews if they have a family? And how did the men who are prominent rise to the top? And who's watching their kids? Why don't you, instead of harping on women and not talking about work-life balance, ask the men about their work-life balance? When you have a conference and you have keynote speakers, ask them to talk about diversity and inclusion in their labs. They are leaders who know that this needs to work. They have 50 people under them. They have 100 people under them. They have 3 people under them. Why are we relegating discussions about women to small groups at conferences? That's one of the things that I'm pushing for. Let's just move on. It's boring. They're having diversity on panels. Yes, we're an international organization. We should have someone from India. We should have the best person on the panel. And if they happen to be from India and Canada and Israel, that's your panel. So for me, it's, oh, excuse me. For me, it's this combination of we're not there yet. Culture change is slow. I think it's about a recognition that we are doing great in some ways, like in India. with STEM and in getting girls into university. But where are those lessons, and how does that culture seep into Canada? So for me, it's a mix. It's a combination, but there are definitely some things that we are doing, WIE is doing, and IEEE is doing, to just stop talking about the nonsense that we know can be dealt with, and move on from there.
Oh, that's really
I
great.
called it nonsense, sorry.
Yeah. And so some cliched questions, I should ask this. Okay. So who has been your, I mean, who has inspired you the most?
Got a pretty strong mum.
Ah,
Got a
great.
pretty strong daughter. um, I've actually been really lucky because I had a lot of professors in university that when I look back were quite supportive in my life, and some teachers, and not all teachers, tended to be more so when I was in university. There's a woman I'm working with, our president-elect, Kathy Land, is an inspiration. She's pretty phenomenal. And I was working with a volunteer also from India named Ramalata Marimutu, and she's incredible. I think people, you know, um, yes, she's based in Kerala, isn't she? So a number of people, my husband, you know, our families, you find inspiration in all sorts of different ways, I think. When it came to my career, I have to admit that from the last several years, my inspiration didn't really come from my companies. I was told very early on in my career that, and I'm only 41, so it's not that much of a career. I mean, I was in university till I was 30, but I was told that you need to find a champion, especially in the organization that I was at. But actually, the truth is, you need to find your champions wherever you are. So if you're looking to make some kind of gender equality change, and even with WIE cannot make any changes for women without having non-women in the room. So I feel like we need to move, like if you feel safe doing so. There are instances where women do not feel safe having these kinds of conversations with non-women around. And the point is that I think for sort of the systemic corporate change that WIE is after, you need to find your ambassadors, your change makers, your champions, people who support you and understand what you're trying to do. Because you are, you know, in this life, whether it's for gender equality or your own career or school decisions, you will hit brick walls. And there is something to be said about navigating these waters. You know, there's an exercise you can do where you write down in, say, your company or your school, or your friends even. Say you're trying to get something out of a friend, or try to convince a friend to do something. You're supposed to write down all the names of the people that you work with and draw lines in between them like a web. And the lines get thicker the more you have better relationships with people. So if I'm trying to get to Minnie, but we don't have a great relationship, but Sharada, I know you do. I talk to you first. So like all of these things about navigating and thinking about your relationships and what works well, it ultimately does come back to what is it you're trying to achieve? Where do you want to be? You know, and those champions they're key, and it's hard to find, but again, it comes back to who do you have an affinity with? Who can you spark with? Who do you like talking to? Whose opinion do you trust? Who do you go to when you have an essay and you really need a true opinion? That's those kinds of things.
Yeah, great. And so when we talk about breaking the glass ceiling, because that's one point which always comes up in conversation with young career holding ladies. So what is your message for how did you break your glass ceiling?
Don't know if I've broken it yet. I have to think about that. But I do know that something that was very interesting, a conversation I had about fellowships and IEEE fellowships, and people are complaining that there aren't enough women fellows. And I had a couple of conversations with the chair of that committee to say, well, what could WIE do? What could anybody do? And he said, well, get more women in the pot, in the nomination pool, because actually the statistics show that the women who come in actually have the same chances, or if not better than the men. So their success rate is fine. It's just you need more women in the pool. And when you think about leaders, and how we're supposed to have mentors and we're supposed to look up to people so that we can attain them. Like, what is it? If you can't see them, you won't be them. But in order to do that, you need more people in the pool. It's not going to magically happen without more women going forward and saying, I can do this, I can strike a balance, I can make this work, I can figure out my path, and have those champions help them along the way. I think the new sort of this diversity and inclusion is a new phrase, and it's really taking and having a voice is really coming to the fore in our culture. Black Lives Matter, and then we had also uh, well, I won't get into all of the other campaigns, but these are important, and having a voice is more important than ever in our society. So I think that the more that we can collect and do these kinds of activities that you're doing now to say to people, actually, it is possible to have it all to some extent. But you will have to have your priorities, and some things won't ever be exactly how you want them. But that's life. That's life. You still have to move forward. That's what we do in our lives. We move forward.
Lisa, I think we are coming close to our time that is given. So what is your, speaking about the changes that you want to make in V and probably in IEEE with the premises that you've already spoken, what is your vision for women in engineering, especially for this year?
Well, Women in Engineering turns 25 next year. And part of me would like to see women in engineering not exist at all in some ways, that it's not required that we constantly have to remind ourselves that there's something called gender and that we all stick to our engineering roots and that's it. But we're not there yet. And I think for WIE, some of the things that I'm pursuing this year, because it's my last year as chair, looking to all the societies and councils of IEEE to ensure that they have a panel that aren't same-sex panels. That's a start. It's very visible. Also encouraging everybody, in that process of this pledge that WIE has already made and that we're going to be sort of making public in a month or so. It would also be about getting people to stop asking the one woman in the room for advice. It's not about having a women in engineering rep to tick a box. It's about understanding that we're a global organization, and it's not just women. Diversity includes geography, topic, capability. Are we addressing any of this? So actually just having those kinds of conversations, that if people take up a pledge and they're already open to the idea that we need to be considering how we do things at a systemic level, then that for me is already a success. The other thing that I would mention is that WIE does so much. You know that you have so many activities happening in Kerala, but around the world, it's very difficult actually to encapsulate all of this and stand up in front of a board to say, this is our impact. My role right now is all about impact, like how are we making a difference and what is that difference? So by the end of the year, we're going to have, WIE will have its 3 and 5 year strategy about what success looks like for us. And I think for me as a leader, that's a bit of my legacy, so that we're not reinventing the wheel every year. A committee of 60 is not feasible for decision making. We have people who change and transition from their rep position once a year. We're trying to make that at least 2 years. This idea that if you can clarify what change you're trying to make and the partnerships that will help you make that change, then at least that's progress. And that's what I'm aiming for.
Oh, that's really good to hear. And Lisa, so thank you. I think your personal narrative through these questions and taking us through your studentship, and then especially how you had come to engineering per se, even though late, I think for the listeners, it is interesting to know that a part of mentoring and involving in a kind of volunteering work actually led you to be aware of your technical skills and come over to you. And a few things which I really liked was what you talked about leadership. Leadership is basically about maintaining the path and trusting your team as you move along, and giving the right direction. You also mentioned to bring about the culture of bracing your hands whenever there is an opportunity. I would rather relate it as whenever there is an opportunity. So that's something that maybe I always keep saying, or we, both Minnie and we, keep saying that is not much good in our society, where girls generally don't raise their hands for anything at all. So this is some things that I think, I'm sure they're going to get inspired from the way you have been narrating your course, and the future direction that you're looking at for the week, especially in terms of what it is when you look at gender. It's not being a lady being there in your pool that is going to help you. It is what matters is the inclusiveness and the way you're going to take it. At some point, you have to come out of this gender thing at all and look at society as one thing with an inclusiveness all along. So thank you so much, Lisa. Minnie, do we open up for maybe a 5 minutes of interaction for the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a couple of questions. We have already received a couple of questions.
Oh.
Lisa, is it visible to you in the chat box? They
Yes.
have typed.
Yes.
Okay, so if you can take it up, maybe another 5 minutes, we'll wind it
Yeah.
up. Okay.
Okay, so we have a question about there's a number of women pursuing degrees, but when it comes to the profession, only 30% of them continue. And why is there a drop in number? I think that there are conflicting, if you don't get the support at work and you feel like you should be at home, there is a big pull to be at home if you have a family. I have been lucky enough in my engineering career to not really have some of these experiences that I've heard from other women over the course of my work with women in engineering. There are women who have it really tough in their workplaces, and diversity is like, and this is not my quote, this is from an American consultant whose name I forget, sorry, but she said that diversity is being asked to the party and inclusiveness is being asked to dance. And I love that, because it means that, you know, when you're at a company and you've been and you've got it and you got the job and you're thrilled, but actually nobody around you is supportive and they don't treat you well, or there's either these microaggressions that may or may not be intentional, it's hard. And again, if you have nobody to support you or no champion to talk to, or then you won't want to stay. And I think that's why a lot of women leave, that they feel like their voice isn't heard, and it is gender based. I have had people take a step back from me when I said I was an engineer. Well, you need to be strong. It is difficult, and I think until we get, it's hard to say, because I don't know, if we had 50% women in the technical professions, would this same attitudes happen? I can't answer that. But I think it's the family pull tends to be quite strong. And even now with COVID and looking at settings and different policies that we have about maternity and paternity leave, and it's so different around the world. And one example would be in Finland, you can work from 8 till 2 because your kids finish at 2 o'clock. But in the UK, you would do that, but to the detriment of the pay and your rent and all the rest of it. It's not the culture. So there are some endemic things that are happening that do stop women from wanting to continue. I hope that answers your question. And then we have another question about multitasking. Or Minnie, do you want to read these out, or do you want me to just keep going?
No, everybody can see that. I think you can answer to the question.
Okay.
You can just read it.
So women are supposed to be multitasking, and how do you cope with stressful situations where you choose between family and job and somewhere in the middle? Well, stress is stress. I'm not really sure if women are great at multitasking. I'm not that great at multitasking. Like, you can really only focus on one thing at a time. I took a productivity course and an email ninja course, which was awesome, about getting your inbox to 0 and thinking about projects and what is the next step that you can take. So one of the things that I tend to do is I always think about the next step of something. But what I find with having a young child at home while we're working, you can only ever really do your best. And I like to set myself a goal for the day. And that's how I minimize my stress. So I take some discrete tasks where I know I can finish something in an hour, or if I need 3 hours, I'll swap with my husband and then we'll figure out all of this stuff. But it is stressful, and at times walking helps. Taking a break. We had our first outing on Sunday after 3 months of being at home and only going to our next door forest, and we went to the McDonald's drive-through, and it was a joy. That was fun. But I think in terms of multitasking, I like to keep a spreadsheet of everything. I'm pretty organized in that way, but taking breaks and realistic goals and chunking up your work into things that actually are hard, but always think my thing is with this productivity, what is the next step you can do? You can only ever do the next step. Okay, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think, yeah, we will, yeah.
Okay. So girls in engineering are less confident compared to boys. Can we have some programs that can help? And then someone, okay. WIE is drafting a top tips document about how to engage specifically with girls in the classroom. There are a lot of organizations who specialize in this, in going into STEM. The thing is that we do all of these programs, and you can look up top tips and ways to engage with girls, and I'm hoping WIE can put ours up by the end of June, because it is specific about science and engineering. Those are specific things that you could change, and I'm not the expert on this. I have a very nice team that's working on this from the education perspective, but I have encountered an experience where I was talking to someone who runs summer schools for kids for STEM. And I said, well, and they were asking me, like, what else could we do to attract them to come back? Because it's just a summer school. And I asked, well, do you speak with the parents? So what happens when a kid who really found a classroom exercise interesting goes home and nobody's interested in hearing about it? There's your barrier. You're not going to get an engineer out of that child if their parents don't understand what engineering is. So one idea would be about also engaging with the families more and figuring out ways that if someone is excelling in a topic, that somehow that gets articulated and you bring in the parents so everybody goes on that journey. But again, that's not my field of expertise. That's just me knowing about how engagement works and how people can fully appreciate that sort of two-way dialogue, that if someone's interested in engineering, how do you support them, and a lot of people don't know how to go forth in this kind of career. I think there was some survey in the US where they were talking about the number of people that were engineers and had family members who were engineers. And again, it's this idea that if you know what's happening, you can follow that path. The last thing I would say to you, and for the sake of sort of time, because we're probably coming to the end of this short chat, was that I would recommend that you take a look at IEEE and WIE and the things that are going on. WIE is trying to get a bit better about articulating what we've got, but we have plenty of opportunities that are online. So I might not be able to tell you exactly what's happening in Colombia and what's happening in Toronto, but we do have, all about the summits, but there are so many other opportunities that you can just make yourself and find funding for. So just reach out to WIE and your exceptional leaders on this call today if you are interested in doing something. The odds are there's probably a program available for you to join in, but there's plenty of opportunity to get involved. And I think that's one of the key messages that I wanted to say, that it is probably one of the best things you will ever do.
Can you take one more last question? What do you feel the best in, as a woman, what do you feel is the best in life? I know it's a difficult question.
Well, I did someone to say to me the other day, what is your ideal day? And I think my ideal day had something to do with family, maybe getting dressed up for a meal. My husband said fishing, and actually I thought, oh, fishing sounds quite nice. Going to the sauna, the Finns like the sauna. The best things in life, Well, from a women in engineering leadership position, I think one of the best things in life is to feel that you've made some difference. And that I'll give you an example just to close the call, that I had a luncheon for women in engineering within my engineering society, EMBS, and they messed up the room number and the time. We had, instead of the 40 people that had signed up, I think 20 had arrived. They'd all paid for their lunches, but for some reason or another, they didn't show up. So it was a very small group of women. And one woman in the room, I think, had 4 children, which was incredible. And because I got one, I could barely handle one. She's a joy, but 4 children. And I think it was her who came up to me at the end of the event and said, you know, Lisa, that was the first time in my whole career that I had been to an engineering event where I could talk about my kids. Thank you. And for me, to be perfectly honest, what a high, you know, what a wonderful thing. And you talk about the best things in life, to make a difference for somebody, because I felt like organizing a luncheon because I thought it was the right thing to do, but to really make a difference is very satisfying, and it makes me very proud. And when I look at Ava, my daughter, and I think about the world that she's coming into, if I can play any kind of role to make that better and easier for her, for all the challenges ahead, then for me, that's the ultimate joy.
Thank you, Lisa. As usual, your wonderful vibration, vibrant, I should say, motivational interaction. I'm sure that you have transformed that energy to our girls also. So before we just conclude an official vote of thanks, we will conclude with that. Over to you, Deepa.
Okay, ma'am. Good evening to all. Let me enter to my duty. Dr. Lisa, Chair, Women in Engineering Committee, in spite of her busy schedule, accepted our invitation and joined us today. Her thoughts are really inspiring one. On behalf of the Women in Engineering Affinity Group, IEEE Kerala Section, I express our sincere gratitude to ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Now I express our sincere thanks to our own vibrant leader, Mrs. Sharada Jagakrishnan, Chair of IEEE Kerala Section. She always motivates and supports us for organizing various programs. Thank you, ma'am. I thank all the senior leaders for their valuable guidance and support. The participants from variable parts are actually the real support and strength of this program. On behalf of the WIE Affinity Group, I express our gratitude to all the participants. I thank the entire team, students as well as professional volunteers for their efforts to make this event a success. We expect your participation and support for our future endeavors. Once again, I thank you all.
So thank you, Deepa, and thank you, Lisa. Here is our virtual memento for you.
Yeah.
I hope you will
It's
accept
absolutely beautiful. And if you could send that to me, I promise that I will print that and frame that for my office.
Sure, sure. And thanks to our we volunteer Amira Shireen, the picture courtesy is Amira. She has done this.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, everyone, and good luck and be safe, please.
Stay safe. Yeah.
thank you, Lisa. Thank you for your time and all the answers going through. Yeah. Hoping to work together in future. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
So that was She Leads. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.